The Digital Healthcare Experience presents the next breakthrough. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Digital Healthcare Experience podcast presented by Taylor Healthcare. I'm your host, Chris Civitaris, and joining me today is Dr. Kaushal Kulkarni, board-certified ophthalmologist with a subspecialty focus in neuro-ophthalmology. He's also the co-founder of meMR Health, a cutting-edge, AI-powered medical record retrieval and analysis platform. Dr. Kulkarni, it's always great to have a fellow New Jersey and New Yorker on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Chris.
It's our pleasure. You've been a leading ophthalmologist for a number of years with a very successful career in medicine. And I'm really curious about what made you want to branch out into the healthcare tech space and specifically the AI space.
For sure. I mean, I think like every doctor in my generation is like not trying to get out of medicine, but thinking of other ways to do things because it's a tough field right now. But I did the traditional path, med school, residency, fellowship. My parents are Indian, so like I had two choices. It was like doctor, lawyer, maybe engineer. And so I just want to be, a good doctor and take care of my patients. But then, once you get out, you kind of realize all the headaches and like the difficult things. And like, anyone that's been a patient knows it's not a great experience and it's not great for the doctors either. And so it was just seeing that like, sure, I can just be in a cog in the wheel here and just do my daily thing. But yeah, like when you're a doctor, you're in it, like you see all the inefficiencies and there's no way to change that from the inside. You kind of have to get out of it and then take a more macro level view. And so that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I don't want to just sit here and complain about all the inefficiencies. I want to do something about it. And so that's how I kind of branched out into the medical record space.
It's fantastic. Be a part of the solution, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. And much of your work at meMR Health is centered around transparency, accuracy, management of data. And as an industry, healthcare has spent collective, untold billions of dollars on things like EHRs and HIEs and the development of standard APIs. And we still have such a long way to go. I'm curious, what are the gaps that you're seeing in the current ecosystem and what are the challenges you're aiming to address?
No, it's funny you mentioned the EHR thing. I mean, I remember as a med student rounding on patients in my surgical rotation, waking up at 4 a.m, and there would be like binders and paper charts. And I remember sitting there writing out my notes in like handwritten notes. And then under Obamacare, they incentivized doctors with about $20 billion of rewards to adopt meaningful use of EHRs. And I saw the whole shift into electronic health records. Everybody thought it was going to solve all their problems and everything's going to be digitized and we're going to be able to have data. And that never manifested. And the reason is if you actually ask Obama, like what is his biggest regret of Obamacare, he will say it's interoperability. They got everybody onto the EHRs, but they just forgot to make them all connect to each other. And so that is hands down the biggest gap I'm seeing. The medical records are electronic, but the sharing of records is still manual. It's still downloading, printing, and faxing, which is just insane. It's 2024, and we're the only industry that still uses a fax machine. It's insane.
Yeah, that's such a great observation. I really enjoy that perspective in terms of sort of the promise of the EHR and sort of the incomplete delivery against that promise. So talk to me a little bit about what meMR Health actually does and the way that you envision it sort of interacting within that ecosystem of healthcare tech and AI.
Sure. I'll tell you just a little story which illustrates it. So I'm a subspecialist. I practice neuro-ophthalmology. I see patients for second, third, and fourth opinions all the time. They've had outside labs, CTs, X-rays, MRIs, oftentimes from the third or fourth physician they're seeing. And as you know, in medicine, like patients come to the visit with zero information and they just expect you to have it all. And rightfully so. I mean, it's not their job to go collect all this data. But I often have patients sitting in my chair with no information. And just a few weeks ago, I saw this case that illustrates it. It was a young woman, 20-something years old. She didn't really know what was going on with her. She was in the ICU for 2 weeks at a nearby hospital, developed some condition, and an eye problem after the condition, and she came to see me. And she was like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm having an eye problem and I have no records. I sent my staff on a wild goose chase to go phoning, faxing, calling the basement of some hospital somewhere, trying to track down the records. And we're in the middle of a busy clinic. Like anyone that's been a patient knows, like you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And everybody's angry in the waiting room. And my staff knows that if they don't get the records, I'm going to like yell at them. So they do a really great job of getting the records. And then they proceed to slap 1,500 pages of records on my desk. And now it's on me, we're in the middle of a busy clinic, to go through all those records and figure out what's going on. And this case was crazy. There was, in that stack of 1,500 records, pages, there was just one lab value that gave away the whole diagnosis. It was a low thiamine level for a condition called Wernicke's encephalopathy. And I immediately knew what she had after that. I didn't need anything else. But that was like 30 minutes of phoning, faxing, chasing down records, and then 30 minutes of me flipping through the records. Basically, the goal of meMR is to streamline and automate that entire process. So we will go out and automatically retrieve the records through various digital on-ramps, including the health information exchanges and some third-party warehousers of data, as well as a last-mile fax ingestion tool. And not only that, once we get the records, we use our machine learning tools to then go through them and then surface the salient points so that you don't have to flip through 1,500 pages.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's amazing how much of that care delivery model is still somewhat siloed, and trying to break down some of those barriers to better connect the various different sort of pieces and parts of that care delivery model is something that could be just so impactful. So it sounds like the objective is to empower both patients and providers. Is that kind of the equation there?
Absolutely. It's funny. We actually began the company thinking of being a patient-facing app where a patient can go download their records, keep them all in one place, bring them to every visit. But we quickly realized that practices and clinical research organizations and basically all verticals of healthcare need this chart-chasing function. And what makes us unique is that a lot of people are trying to do this through APIs, basically trying to create a magic API that connects all these siloed is a great word to use. Siloed sources of data and siloed EHRs. And our thesis is that is not going to happen anytime soon. Healthcare is just too fragmented. There's too many misaligned incentives. And so the reason that we are getting traction and customers are coming to us is that we can basically access almost any EHR in the country and retrieve specific medical records because we are aligned with the current workflow of these practices. And the reason is we have 2 physician co-founders on our team. So we just get it. Like we're not just, some tech bros that are trying to solve healthcare. We're in it. And so every single thing we do is with the physician and the practice and the clinician and the clinical reviewer in mind.
I think that's so key. It's, I think sometimes you're right. In the tech world, we get so obsessed with the tech and, what can AI do for us today, right? But I think that the approach, people, process, technology, you have to have kind of all 3 legs of that stool in order to be successful, right?
Absolutely. Healthcare it's slow to change. People are very stuck in their ways. And you have to fit into the current workflow. If you just try and throw, some piece of technology at doctors, see how well that goes. It doesn't go well.
I feel like we've tried that with the EHR, and it wasn't until we started actually involving the physicians and sort of the the development and the implementation and the training. It's a great case example, right, in terms of what we learned with the deployment of those EHRs.
Yeah. I went to med school because I wanted to sit in front of a computer and type, transfer information from one place to another.
Everybody's dream.
Right.
So that's really interesting. And I want to focus in a little bit on the physician side of this. So much, rightfully so, has been made, certainly since the pandemic, about physician and clinician burnout. That's been a concern in the industry for many years, but I think that the pandemic really put a spotlight on it. I'm curious about your perspective on AI and solutions like meMR Health. Is there a role for these types of technologies to play there?
Yeah, absolutely. And this ties into your first question about why did I personally branch off. It was burnout, to be honest. You get burnt out doing the same thing over and over, kind of saying the same thing over and over. And spending 50% of your time typing stuff into the computer when you went into this field because you wanted to help people and make a difference. And then you have all this training, and then it's really easy to burn out. So that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve, not only with meMR, but I think AI in general. What I'll say about that is that, again, I think people that are not in healthcare think that the most important use of AI is for clinical diagnosis, right? Like, let's help the clinician make the diagnosis. And I always tell people, like, no, like, that is not the hard part of medicine. Like, making the diagnosis is the easiest part. Like, we don't need AI for that, at least right now. Everything before the diagnosis and after the diagnosis is the hard part. And what I mean by that is it's automating clinical workflows. It's workflow automation where AI, I think, is going to make the biggest difference, because that's where the burnout comes from. So think of everything from checking the patient in, scheduling the appointment, getting their past medical records, and now analyzing those records, putting those into the EHR, and then after the visit, sending them care summaries, guidelines, summary of their visit, making sure they take their medications. I think that's where the real power of AI will be. And I think eventually on the clinical side, yes, it can assist with diagnosis, but right now, like, we don't need to worry about that. Like, doctors can diagnose.
And it seems like such a win if we can find a way, to your point, to take that 1,500 page binder of information about a particular patient. I mean, the amount of information about the particular patient and about best practices in terms of a particular condition or disease state, the latest treatment options. There's so much information that the entire medical community kind of has access to today. I wonder if it's even realistic to have an expectation that physicians alone with a human mind can distill all of that, summarize it, make sense of it in a way that is, in any way, shape, or form efficient. So it seems like the AI tools that are being developed and brought to market, they're going a long way to assist physicians in terms of that distillation of information and that sort of creation of a picture. Is that fair to characterize it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I always say that, like, too much data is also not good, right? Like, if you just throw like all this data at a physician, it's not useful. Like our motto is like getting the right data into the right hands at the right time. And, like, all three of those things have to line up for it to be useful. And, like, that's another problem with some of the current solutions, like these APIs. They dump, like, a huge JSON file on you with all this, like, data, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, you just, like, tell me what's going on with this patient. And so that's where, as you said, like, that's where the machine learning and AI tools will come in.
That's fantastic. I'm curious about where you see the puck going. So, AI is still. I know we've been working on AI as as an industry, as a society for a decade or better. But in terms of the practical uses that are being brought to healthcare and other industries, we're still kind of embryonic. I'm curious about where you see the technology going in general over the next, short-term 12 months. And then as you sort of extrapolate into the next 3 or 5 years, what do you see in the future here in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of take a deep dive into this. We're going to get a little technical here, but I think it's important because AI is such an umbrella term, and, like, I don't even know what that means. So I would say basically there's two things I see. So on the LLM side, I think one use case is this, like, office to office communication, or like patient to physician communication. I think these language models can help to automate a lot of those processes. And there's just a lot of wasted time in trying to obtain information from another office or, like, respond to patient messages. That's one use case. The other one, which I think everyone's trying to do, is like, okay, if I feed a medical record, like a PDF, to an LLM, can it answer questions for me? Right now, the answer is no, it cannot.
Right.
But that's a deep technical problem that we're working on. And in that, the difference in healthcare is that, like, you can't be wrong. It is not okay like, to be wrong. So if I ask ChatGPT a random question and it hallucinates, like, it's funny. If
Right.
I ask it a question about your health data and it hallucinates, like, the patient dies. Like, it's not funny. And that's
right.
one thing I have to always, like, keep pushing our engineers on, because they're like, okay, 95% accurate, like, that's amazing. And I'm like, no, in healthcare, like, that is, like, horrible. Like, it has to be like 99.9. And so that gets into the second piece is that I think there's sort of a labeling, a data structuring and extraction problem. So like identifying different parts of the records, recognizing like what it is, and then extracting that data. And there's tons of companies working on it. I think this is the cutting edge of where AI is for medical records.
Do you think that we've gone far enough in terms of just having the data at our fingertips and doing the data collection piece? Have the EHR companies evolved enough to the point where the AI is going to be able to, I'll say, sort of be layered onto it to make that data meaningful? Or do you think that there's still even, I'll say, sort of fundamental issues in terms of the amount of data or the types of data that is being collected and that we actually need to collect in order to make this really impactful?
I think there's a ton of issues. I mean, Epic is trying to do this. Like they're all trying to do it, but I would say a couple things. So number one, none of these EHR companies want to share their data with like other EHR companies. Like they want to keep the customers and patients siloed within their ecosystem, and which makes sense. It again gets back to the misaligned incentives that happened with meaningful use in Obamacare. It's a little bit too late to unwind those. But even if you can slap a chatbot or language model onto your Epic instance, that doesn't necessarily connect to someone else's instance of Epic, let alone like Cerner or NextGen or something. So the sharing of data, like overcoming this siloed nature of the data, is not going to be solved by that. Number two is the data within the EHRs is not really structured properly. Like EHRs were built as a billing tool. The intention was not let me structure all this data so that we can harness it, use it for insights and clinical trials, et cetera. It was built for like billing, and that's why it's so clunky and all these notes are so long and physicians hate it. So I think those two problems, again, it kind of goes back to our thesis at meMR, is that it can't be solved unless you really fit into like the current ecosystem and workflow.
Right. And it has to be more about, what's the CPT4 code? What's the ICD-10 code? It has to be deeper than that in terms of, to your example earlier, finding that line in that 1,500 pages that points the physician directly to, sort of the eureka moment, if you will. And it doesn't sound like anything being contemplated sort of in the EHR space or elsewhere is really getting to that layer of detail.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of companies working on it, but it's like, you can only do it like within your ecosystem. Like no one's really solved the problem of like how do you transfer data across ecosystems. And I think this is brings up a point about where healthcare is going. Obviously, by 2030, the government wants all their Medicare patients to be in a value-based contract. I think that's a little aggressive. It may not happen, but I think once you start talking about value-based contracts, that's where I think the incentive is really going to be like, okay, how do we really harness the right data from these patients at the right time?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great observation. And, obviously the federal government has a lot to say about, where this space is going to go. And I agree, 2030 sounds like a long way away, but it's, that's kind of in the windshield at this point. That's right down the road from us. So really, really interesting observation there. Interesting space, of course. I'm curious, do you have anything else that you want to sort of bring up? Thoughts that you want to share with our listeners, projects that you're going to be working on, anything at all in terms of, anything you want to close with here today?
I would just say, again, my background's as a physician. So like I went into this because like you want to help people. And I think one of the things we do at meMR is like we're always keeping the patient at the center of things and keeping the patient in mind. And I think a lot of people kind of fail to do that because they don't interact with patients or have that experience. So I would just say, if there's, anyone that's listening to this has been a patient, if anyone, the experience is not great, healthcare is really, really hard to navigate. It's just a frustrating experience. So like, I really feel that. And that is what motivates me. And that's what motivates our team. So I would just say, I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. This was really a fantastic conversation. Can you let our listeners know where they can go to learn more about the work that you're doing at meMR?
Sure. meMRhealth.com is the best place, and everything's on our website. You can contact us on there. It would be great to hear from anyone.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Dr. Kulkarni. This was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Great being here. Thank you, Chris.
And for our listeners, if you enjoyed the conversation, please like, share, subscribe, and help us grow the show to bring you more content like this. And until next time, this is Chris Civitarice for the Digital Healthcare Experience in Taylor Healthcare, wishing you health and good cheer. Take care.
To learn more about Taylor Healthcare, please visit taylor.com/digital-healthcare. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice or services. The Digital Healthcare Experience is produced by Naomi Schwimmer. Podcast music by Nicholas Bach.